Welcome to Coral Talks with your host, Caroline. How are y'all doing? Well, I can't hear you guys, but I hope it's well. I hope you guys are doing well. So this is my first episode, and it's a solo episode. It might be my last solo episode because, boy, this is going to be very, very awkward talking to myself for 30 minutes or for who knows how long. Anyway, let's get started. I thought I'd introduce myself for a bit and what this podcast is. So, I am a student. I'm Caroline, as you have already heard from the beginning. And I titled this podcast Coral Talks because I had something going on. My name is Carol, that's what my friends call me, and I love coral. And so I was like, hey, let's name this podcast Coral Talks because it's so similar to my name, and I'm obsessed with coral. And another reason why it's called Coral Talks is because this podcast is going to be all things marine life, conservation, quirky, interesting things about the environment that I end up deciding to talk about. There'll also be guest co-hosts, so be looking forward to that. That'll be fun. But in the meantime, it's just me. Now, you might be asking what got Carol into this. Why is she doing this podcast, yapping about marine life and everything like that? I don't know if you'll would actually be wondering this, but I'm still going to talk about it. So, I was on vacation. This was a few years back. I was on vacation in Cancun, and because, as you all may know, I really like swimming. Swimming is my obsession. And I was like, hey, why don't I get scuba diving certified? People say the coral, the fishies, and the artifacts down there in Cancun is really cool, but you can only go see it if you're certified scuba diving. And so I did it. Right, I spent 4 days. I did all the prerequisites in a swimming pool, and we went on 4-day dives and got my skills mastered and stuff like that, and I got certified. It was cool. It was really, there was a lot of things to see, and I was definitely very overstimulated with the amount of life that was underneath there. After that trip, I don't know what happened, but I was just very mesmerized, so I wanted to continue, and I intentionally started researching places I could go diving. I could spend more money on diving, making myself more broke. But I did, and I ended up diving at a lot of cool places, different scenarios, different scenery, and different dive. I don't know how you would describe it, but different dive itineraries and experiences. But it was super exciting. And just through all this, I learned a lot about marine life and conservation and environment. And I also met a lot of cool people from around the world, or just cool people who do cool things. And I'm also hoping I can invite them on future episodes as co hosts as well. So, I thought for this podcast, we would have a joke of the episode, to get things started, to crack a little giggles so it's not that boring. And also a special little section where it's just going to be an optimistic fun fact of the ocean or a featured species, something of that sort. Okay, joke of the day. How many tickles does it take to make an octopus laugh? Drumroll. Tentacles. Right? Get it? Yeah. Yeah. It's really funny. I can hear you guys laughing on the other side of this. See, this is what I'm talking about. It's really awkward just talking to yourself, saying jokes, and, having to laugh at it yourself. But it's okay. It's okay. And today's little special section is going to be a featured species. I thought since the spirit of Halloween, it's October, I wanted to do something spooky. And it's going to be a ghost shark. Now, It's a shark in its name, but it's not actually a shark. It's a fish. It's really tiny, like you wouldn't even be scared of it, honestly. But ghost sharks are really related to sharks and rays, which explains their name. And they're found in just moderate temperature waters, not too cold, not too hot, around the areas of like southern Australia and New Zealand. And they're considered deep water animals, like the ones that are, that live in the deep darkness of the sea. So sometimes they might not seem friendly, and trust me, I googled the picture. Like, I haven't been able to see them in person, unfortunately. I didn't have the privilege to do so yet. But I did Google a lot of pictures, and they do kind of look like the stereotypical deep water fish that you would find somewhere down there. And so, anyway, back to the featured species. To explain a little bit more about ghost sharks, they are cartilaginous fishes, which just basically means that their skeletons are made out of a lot of cartilage. And like I said, they live around the deep ocean, which is about 8,000 feet, 9,000 feet, which, trust me, I would never in my wildest dreams be able to go down there, although I really want to. And their diet is shellfish, mollusks, and worms. And their babies are basically on the seafloor, and they hide them along little nooks and crannies. And when the babies are born, they eat the things on the seafloor, which are like worms, shellfish. And once they grow up, they still live in the seafloor. Yeah. And so in New Zealand, the South Island of New Zealand called Chatterais, the scientists discovered a new species of ghost sharks, and they're called the narrow-nosed spookfish. Their scientific name, if you want to be all fancy, is called the Hirota avia, and it's this really slender fish with a snout that's like a needle. Its snout is really thin, long, needle-like, almost to attack anyone that's in their way, in my opinion. And like I said, the body is really slender, but despite its really slender body, it has long, broad, like wing-like pectoral fins, and it just makes it really fascinating. Their color is chocolate brown, and it has super big eyes. Like the eyes that are definitely going to win you in a staring contest and scare you in the middle of the night, kind of big. And so that's it. My featured species of the day and my joke. I hope you enjoyed that. For the second section, I went ahead and I collected a lot of questions from my classmates about random interesting things that they wanted to know about marine life and in the environment. And honestly, I have to say, some of my friends are really serious, and when I asked them, they went kind of formal. They started giving me like political questions that might involve some political thinking and like some tea about the government and all that, and it was too complicated. I had to force a question out of them that was a little bit more manageable for me, honestly, to research and to talk about, because I want this space to be more or less lighthearted and fun and, I don't know, educational, if you will. So, just so you know, there's going to be no political, no too in-depth things, because your girl cannot talk about that in this setting properly. She does not have the brain cells for that. But let's get started with the first question. I think it'd be really fun. I ended up getting a few cool questions, fun questions, some specific questions about animals, a day in the life of an animal, what is a specific animal. So those are for future topics, but I hope you'll be excited for that. But for today, I'm not really sure if this question is going to be boring or too scientific for you to continue listening, but I'm here, I'm talking, I'm entertaining myself at this point. So, this first question is shout out to Avery. She is curious about how much animal and human waste is in the ocean exactly, and whether or not we consume it. So I guess kind of like the effects that these waste has on humans. So before I researched any of this, these are just my preliminary thoughts. Animal waste, for sure. I know every single animal pees, poops, they do their business for sure. And animal waste is good for the ocean because nothing in nature is wasted. I've learned that from a special place called Kelp. An environmental camp that I went to was awesome. Nothing in nature is wasted. Everything in nature has a purpose. So I'm assuming that all animal waste, yes, all animals do poop, do pee, and all of those things are being used for the good. Because so I know they let out nitrogen, and that nitrogen is used to produce the plants like algae, coral, and plants in the ocean to help that whole ecosystem grow. And so that's the part on animal waste that I think I know. I want to be confident, but as you know me, I'm not that confident. But I think that is right for animal waste. And honestly, I didn't do that much research on that. But for human waste, I know that all of our feces and our waste goes to the ocean eventually, a body of water, if you will. And I know that it has a lot of effects negatively. So I did some research, and here it is. Keep in mind that I might just start to talking like I'm presenting, but bear with me. First of all, what is our feces and waste made out of? So our pee is made out of 95% water. I know this is very intimate for a first episode, but our pee is made out of 95% water and some particles of chloride, nitrogen ions, maybe some potassium, just all that chemical things you would learn in chemistry. And basically, it's a lot of nitrogen. And like I was mentioning earlier, the water ocean ecosystem has nitrogen, but that nitrogen is really balanced to help the entire system with growth of plants like algae and kelp into food for fishes and sea animals, into that whole process again. But see, if you're adding another third party like all over millions, billions of people's human waste into the water, you would assume that it's going to be an excess amount of nitrogen, right? Because it's too much. And that's exactly the problem. So, to answer Avery's question, yes, there is a lot of human waste in the ocean, and it's uncountable. Honestly, nobody knows exactly how much, but it's just a lot. And they do affect us. We do consume it, and it does cause problems, both for communities as a whole, people's health effects, and the ecosystem, the precious coral and the precious fishies. So let's start from the beginning. When we poop and when we pee, that all goes into the sewage that goes to watersheds. And watersheds are basically just a little area of land that leads to a body of water. All of our waste is gathered there and is led into a body of water that causes an excess amount of nitrogen release. Some parts of the world, it's really concentrated with these human feces. And those places are usually really densely populated countries like India, China, Africa, and they're the places where it's literally 11% of our global wastewater nitrogen release. So, I mean, no shame to them. It's just the way it is. It's how our world works. But it's a lot. A lot is coming from these densely populated areas. It's a problem because it causes algae blooms, which I'll get into that a little bit later. And those algae blooms cause dead zones, which I'll explain a bit later too. And part of the dead zone also affects coral and it affects fish. And that affected fish affects the people, the consumerism and the economy and the people who buy the fish, who eat fish in their diet, because it then causes them health issues that stem all the way from the waste that people create and is released into the water. And so back to algae blooms, because this is the first, basically, how these nitrogen release wastewaters are affecting them from the start. So this extra nitrogen release causes abnormal growths of algae. So as you might know, if you don't, the plants in the ocean, specifically algae and kelp, they need nitrogen to grow. They need nitrogen, phosphorus to grow. And because they're plants, they need oxygen for respiration, photosynthesis, all that jazz. If they're overgrown, they take up too much oxygen. They're stealing the oxygen that the fish also need, as a shared space that they need to share. But unfortunately, the plants are taking too much of the oxygen, which leads to a dead zone. That is a zone in various places of the ocean where it's basically dead. Like its name, the fishes either migrate out or they are sick and they die. And the coral also bleach, they get unhealthy, and all kinds of things happen to them, and they start to decrease in size and decrease in population. That is all because of the lack of oxygen that is taken from the algae. And keep in mind that the algae is supposed to be part of their cycle that helps them survive. So just think about it. It's really mind-blowing how an excessive amount of something can turn good that's meant to help this ecosystem, but instead let them die and become this dead zone. So this is actually in the US. One of the greatest areas that is considered a dead zone is around the Great Lakes, like up there, in the United States, and the northern Gulf of Mexico, which is Louisiana, New Jersey, those places. They have a lot of dead zones, and they're considered one of the largest among the world right now, and it's really sad. Poor coral, poor fishies. Just take a moment to see how big this effect of just our daily poops. They can amount to something this tragic, and yeah, it's very heartbreaking. Besides from dead zones, okay, besides from algae blooms, dead zones, these wastewater don't just cause those things. You have to know that the ocean is, I don't know the statistics, it makes up like 70% of our world or something like that. But there are other parts of water too that don't necessarily have algae blooms or dead zones. Just in general, the fish, the marine life, they're affected, right? All these waste that are being put into the ocean, they're nitrates. Nitrogen is related to nitrates, nitrites, phosphorus, and they're basically just inorganic nitrogenous compounds. That was very fancy. That was very complicated, but yes, just nitrogen. And these fish ingest extra nitrates and inorganic compounds that eventually leads to the fish dying, if not dead, being really ill and unhealthy and just having large amounts of nitrates in their body. For the fish that don't die, some fish just live and some fish, breed and give birth to new fish, and they might have birth defects. They might affect their population species as a whole. And so that's one part of the ingested nitrates for the fish that don't die. But then there's this other part where we as humans catch sea life, seafood to eat. It's delicacy for many people, for many places, for many cultures around the world. Seafood that we catch, they are filled with nitrate and we eat them. We eat these nitrogen filled seafood. According to the fancy scientists who have actually done research on this instead of just like yapping, Googling about this, their scientific research says that a lot of these unhealthy fish, unhealthy seafood that we consume is actually a factor of cancers like ovarian cancer, bladder cancer, intestinal cancer, infections like respiratory tract infections, and a specific type of diabetes, and just a lot of health issues. It's really sad to see see the complete cycle effect, how we create the waste. This is nothing about this is blaming anyone or pointing a finger at anyone. I don't know, I'm trying to raise awareness and just state the facts. It's interesting how we as humans, we poop and we create this waste and send them off because we don't have anywhere for it to go. Right? The only place is the water, and it feels like we're getting rid of it because the vast ocean, it's so deep, it's endless, it's beyond what we can imagine. So we put it into the water thinking that it'll disappear. But in reality, it makes a full circle. It comes back in the fish and the seafood that we consume. It takes a toll on us environmentally as well. There's just a lot of aspects, and I'm sorry that if my rant made no sense. I know I went on a lot of tangents from like how the nitrogen, gets deployed into the ocean, and then how that causes like algae blooms, and how that causes dead zones, and how other than that they also cause dead fish, they cause unhealthy species of fish, and they also ultimately come back to us as humans. And a little bit, okay, I know I've talked a lot about just the effects in the water, and some people listening might just be wondering, okay, yeah, that's honestly none of our business. Like, we live on land, and I don't even eat seafood, like some people might say. But there are more effects than just in the water, because the wastewater that goes into the water, the ocean, comes back and bites a lot of communities, because there's a lot of communities all over the world, and different communities have different resources as to where their water source is. Some communities get their water source from the ocean, or from natural bodies of water, and some places they don't have the correct filterization or their culture. There's a lot of different aspects as to getting water from a natural body of water and how they use it. This release of wastewater really affects specifically these communities that get their water supplied directly from these bodies of water, because think about it, these polluted, filled with nitrogen, unhealthy chemically wastewater gets into the water and communities get those water, like, I don't know, retrieve the water that is polluted. It's their water that they drink and the water that they use for living. Those communities are just consuming the water that's been polluted with nitrogen. It's bad for their health. It's bad for the community's health and for children's health, for future generations of that community's health. So it's another cycle. It's literally, honestly, cycle on cycle on cycle of issues. I'm gonna be fancy again with the scientists, the fancy scientists, specifically on the effect of water supply on communities. Scientists have, researched that these excessively polluted with nitrogen water has affected the hemoglobin functions of infants and children. And if I know it's fancy, hemoglobin is just like blood cells, and they carry blood and carry nutrients to and fro to your body, within your body. These intake of bad water, I'm just gonna say, they affect the ability of hemoglobin to carry oxygen throughout your body. That's an effect. That's a really major effect that might cause death, might cause illness, might cause birth defects. Yeah, it's just a lot of effects. And I know that got very depressing, that got very complicated when I literally just said I could not talk about complicated stuff. But yeah, I mean, originally I thought it'd be a fun, quirky topic to talk about, but then I started researching and I started, getting all these effects it had on us, and I was just like, wow, it was not as demure, not as mindful, as quirky as I thought it was going to be. And on a better note, as we're almost ending, I know this has been a long time, but on a lighter note, the governments, they get it. Okay, they are aware of what is happening, and they're trying to solve it. So from studies in 2014, okay, I'm getting all this from official sites, so even though I'm not giving you guys a resource cited guide sheet, I just know that all of these I've spent time and looked on official websites to get these information. And so anyway, according to NOAA, which is the official oceanic awareness organization, in 2014 they did a study, recorded that it was 80% of global untreated wastewater that went into the water, just these unhealthy, very chemically prone wastewater filled with nitrogen, 80% of that globally that went into the water. And now in 2019-ish, they did another report and it was down to 48%. So that is an improvement. I know it's halfway there. We still have a lot to work on, but at least that's an improvement. Just to be informed, some of the ways that they are trying to make it better, is just creating waste treatment plants. So instead of our waste being directly sent to the watersheds that I was talking about earlier, it is sent to a treatment plant instead. So it goes to a treatment plant which extracts all the dangerous pollutants like nitrogen, phosphorus, and all the chemicals in our feces, in our pee, before getting released to the bodies of water. Because like I said earlier, some people might say that it's it's wrong to release these wastewater into these bodies of water, but as the world, on Earth, there's really no place to put it. We have billions and millions of people that poop. instead of arguing on not putting it in a body of water, I appreciate governments and officials trying to make treatment plants and trying their best to minimize the dangerous effects that it has on these bodies of water. I know that it's not perfect, and a lot of sewage still directly goes to bodies of water, but at least these treatment plants are a thing and they're in place, and a lot of wastewater waste now goes through treatment plants before they are released, and I am hopeful. So that was a lot. That was definitely a lot. Oh, and I have a fun fact that I definitely forgot to mention from earlier about how, about the toll that these nitrogen has on sea animals. So, fun fact, sea animals according to marine biologists, sea animals seem to be a little bit more tolerant to these organic compounds compared to freshwater animals. And I didn't really research this, no fact checking for this, but I am assuming because of the salinity of the sea, because the sea already includes a lot of salts, not dangerous chemicals, but certain aspects of chemicals already that the fishes are already exposed to. That's why they're able to adapt and be a little bit more tolerant compared to freshwater, where it's just fresh water and there's less of these chemicals in there. Yep, so that's my fun fact. That is my little spiel research on Avery's question about human animal waste in the ocean and kind of the effects on it. I guess that pretty much sums up this episode. This was pretty long. Definitely I'm gonna go get a snack. I have to go do my homework. But yeah, I hope you guys, I don't know if anyone's still listening at this point, but I hope you guys at least try to follow along with my very unorganized talking, and maybe put me in the background. That's totally fine, or whatever you decide to do. But thank you so much for listening. Hopefully next week there's going to be a special guest. I'm hopeful of that. But if not, it's just going to be me, same old me, and we'll talk about something a little bit more lighthearted than this. I want something more fun. So thank you so much for listening. I had a lot of fun being a little bit more knowledge with the world, being able to research about this, and I hope you did too. Have a wonderful sleigh day, sleigh morning, sleigh night, whenever you're listening to this. And I love you guys, very beautiful people. Bye. Caroline Coral Talks, Episode 1 out.